verse 9, 10, 11 and 12 and figure the rest of those verses out. So that's the starting point for that. Verse 27 and verse 28 are dealing with the history of Mark Antony and Caesar Augustus, this battle between them. When in verse 27 it says both these kings, it's talking about Mark Antony and Caesar Augustus and the warfare that they had during this time period of verse 25 and the Battle of Actium. And it says, the last part of the verse, it says, but it shall not prosper, for yet at the end shall be the time appointed. So whatever these rulers are trying to do, the destruction is still going to occur in the year 330 AD. They're not going to avoid that. I've skipped 26, yeah. 26 and 25 are connected together, but I haven't made a comment on 26. Yes. So 27 is just a continuation of the history in verse 25, because you're dealing with those two powers. Mark Antony and Caesar Augustus are the two kings that are fighting during this time period, the Battle of Actium. You find that Mark Antony actually sides with the Egyptians. So he becomes the general who's leading out the Egyptian army, and he's fighting against his own people. So there's a warfare between Mark Antony, who's siding with Cleopatra, and they get an Egyptian army and they go to war with Caesar Augustus, and that war is at the Battle of Actium. Caesar Augustus wins the war, Cleopatra flees back home, Rome subjugates Egypt, and Mark Antony commits suicide. So that's kind of the history that's being discussed there, the time frame of it. 28 is connected with that again, but I'm going to skip 28 as well. And
the year of the battle?
31 BC. 31 BC, Battle of Actium. Yeah, it's the same battle. So let's go to verse 29. In verse 29 it says, at the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. So at the time appointed is at the end of that time prophecy of verse 24. So we're in 330 AD. We're in verse 29 and we're at 330 AD. The reason why it was important to understand that when pagan Rome takes the nation of Greece in 168 BC, that it becomes the king of the north, is for this reason. What makes Rome strong? The thing that makes Rome strong is its power base. When it stands in the city of Rome and does warfare from that city, and I don't mean it in some kind of mystical sense, but from a prophetic sense, as long as it's holding on to the city of Rome, it's strong and can't be beaten. They're the king of the world, they're the king of the north. In 330 AD, when Constantine vacates the city of Rome and moves the kingdom, the pagan Roman kingdom, to Constantinople, trouble starts, and Rome starts deteriorating from that year. What happens is this: you have the city of Rome here, okay, and you have the Caesar who lives in the city of Rome. At this time period, Christianity is already well established for most parts of the world, and there, I'm going to put P for the Pope, okay? There's a Pope, or there's a Christian leader who's living in the city of Rome. There's a Christian church there. When Constantine leaves and he moves over to Constantinople here, he makes his kingdom, there's a power vacuum that's left in the city of Rome. So when he leaves, there's no effective ruler to rule that city, and the Pope begins to establish himself and not only becomes a religious leader, but starts to take on political significance. When Constantine leaves the city of Rome, this is Rome and this is Constantinople, what he does, he leaves the title of King of the North in Rome. So when Rome moves to Constantinople, the title of the King of the North is left in the city. He doesn't take the title with him. And when he leaves his title here, the person who picks it up is the Pope. So 330 AD marks when papal Rome becomes the King of the North.
So is it because he hands over the throne to the King of the North then?
Essentially.
Right.
It gets very interesting. Someone was talking about the trumpets, of why the trumpets actually do the work that they do. We know that the trumpets attack this part of the kingdom. Yeah, they attack the western part of Rome. They don't actually attack the eastern part of Rome. Does everybody realise that? Yeah? And you'd have to ask yourself the question, I'm not going to address it, why do they attack this part when Rome's actually moved over there? There's really significant reasons for that. When you go to a study of the trumpets, it becomes very clear of what's going on. And the reason they attack, I'll give it simply, I'm not going to discuss it why, the reason they attack Rome and not Constantinople is because they're after the King of the North. They want to come and destroy the King of the North, and the King of the North has stayed here. The person may have changed, the face may have changed from a Caesar to a Pope, but they're after the King of the North, and that's why the warfare happens there.
The geographical area is where they're going to attack.
Yes, they attack the western half of.
It doesn't matter who's there, the trumpets will go to that area.
Yes, they'll go to where the King of the North is. Let me put it that way. The King of the North is here, so that's why they're focusing the attention here, because they're. It is, and it isn't. The point, it's geographical in the sense that it's the city of Rome, but it's not in the sense that they want to. They come to attack the King of the North, and the King of the North has stayed where he was.
But the King of the North is wrong. So why are they staying here? The King of the North is wrong, so I don't understand why they're still there to go over to that side when you said. Okay.
What happens is,
I know you don't want to know why.
the city of Rome is the power base that Rome has. The Caesars. When the Caesars vacate the city of Rome, they leave the title for their kingdom, which is the title of the King of the North. They took that title from Greece in 168. They leave that title here. And having left that title, and they move out of the city, the person who takes up the throne of the city of Rome takes up the title for the King of the North. So essentially they leave their throne here and start a new kingdom over here. So it's this idea of leaving their throne or their title back here that...
You're saying they set up powers like branches everywhere. They set up powers.
The transition between pagan Rome and papal Rome doesn't just happen in one fell swoop. It doesn't happen in 538 AD. It happens in a transition. Let me give you a Bible verse to help us with this. Okay, let's give a Bible verse. So my brother's already thinking ahead of me. So let's go to Revelation 13 verse 2 to try and settle this. Revelation 13 verse 2, I'm just going to paraphrase. It says, the dragon gave him his beast, so it gave him his power, seat and authority. The seat of a kingdom is where your throne is. Okay? If you go back to chapter 12 and you see who the dragon is, it says it's a red dragon. Ellen White, commenting on that passage, says in the secondary sense it's pagan Rome. Okay? You can see that the activities of this dragon are pagan Rome. Okay? So in verse 2 of chapter 13 it says, pagan Rome will give three things to papal Rome, and one of them is its seat. Okay, the seat of pagan Rome was the city of Rome. Does that make sense? Okay, it vacates that city, and when it vacates the city, it gives its seat to the papacy. Okay? Chapter 13, verse 2. Verse 2, sorry. I said verse 30, it was a mistake. We're in Revelation 13, verse 2.
So it's President Constantinople unwittingly give up this title of King of the North.
Yes.
Now from a prophetic sense.
That's right. Yeah, he's not thinking about that. Unwittingly he does that. But for a prophetic sense he gives up his title. this history, or this giving up of his seat, is also discussed in Daniel chapter 8 verse 11. In Daniel chapter 8 verse 11 it's also discussed. I'm just going to read the portion of the verse that it says that. It says, "And the place of his sanctuary was cast down." So he's casting down of pagan Rome's sanctuary, or the place of his sanctuary is the casting down of the city of Rome, or the rejection of the city of Rome. So this idea of him leaving his seat or his title here is fixed in the scriptures. We have Daniel 8:11 and Revelation 13:2. Both of these confirm that when pagan Rome leaves, he leaves his seat and he casts down, or he gives up, the place where his sanctuary was. Does that make sense?
Sorry, the title of the King of the North, isn't it that when you use the principle, especially in the verse 40, that the Lord was after the cross spiritual, so isn't this after the cross, so that wouldn't...
Yeah, this is spiritual, isn't it? Because north is north of Israel, and who's north of Israel? Babylon. Babylon is the king of the north, is he not? Okay. Who is papal Rome? Babylon. Revelation 17, Mystery Babylon. It doesn't do any disservice to the idea that you're asking.
That's the geographic, you're doing that geographic thinking, it's that...
1 Corinthians 15 says, first was the literal, then the spiritual. So,
It's a mixture of both, isn't it?
no, we're talking about Rome here. Rome is not, he's using his geographic sense of being north of Israel. You're going to use the same idea when we get to verse 40 to identify France, aren't you? Yeah. You're going to identify characteristics of Egypt and Sodom. You're going to pull out those characteristics and plant them into France. So we're implanting the idea where the king of the north came from, and that power transfer from Babylon to Greece to the city of Rome is clear. There's another history, which I'm not going to go, but I will just mention, that from Babylon, the Chaldean Empire, you can see that the priesthood went from Babylon to Pergamos, and from Pergamos, which is in the Grecian Empire, gets transferred from Greece to Rome. So the actual religion in Rome is the Chaldean or the Babylonian religion. There's another route to understand from a religious perspective that this is Babylon. It goes, and the transfer is spoken about in Revelation on one of the churches. Someone might know what church it is. It goes from Babylon to Pergamos to the city of Rome. I hope everybody's comfortable with that. With the king of the north in 330 AD takes up the title for the king of the north. Okay, we're into verse 30. We're into verse 30. I'm just going to tuck over here Revelation 13 verse 2, and we have power, seat and authority. The seat was given in 330 AD, king of the north. We've already addressed that. We're going to address one other issue now in verse 30. Verse 30 says this, "For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do, he shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant." So it talks about here the ships of Chittim, which are the Vandals, and this is the warfare that is occurring during the history of the second trumpet. Okay, so we're in verse 30, and the year for this I'm choosing is 533 AD. The ships of Chittim, or the Vandals, have been warring against Rome for a number of years now, and Chittim is the Vandals, and they are the second trumpet, of Revelation chapter 8.